I am Kathryn Kidder. Today is July 7th, 2020. I'm with Becky Sammons. Becky, would you please say and spell your name?
My name is Becky Sammons, BECKYSAMMONS.
And your maiden name?
Bell, BELL.
Okay, I'm so pleased that you're with us today and delighted that you're going to record your recollections of the Agricultural Women's Club. This organization that we're going to be talking about was founded in 1908, associated with the University of Florida, and disbanded this year, 2020. Let's start this history with biographical information about you, Becky. Where and when were you born?
I was born in Belleville, Illinois, a suburb of East St. Louis, and on May 3rd, 1947.
Was that in a hospital?
Yes. To think back.
Yeah. And what were your parents' names?
My father's name was Mace H. Bell, and my mother was Virginia Watson Bell.
How was your father's first name spelled?
M-A-C-E.
Mm-hmm. And what was their place of origin?
They had both been born in the United States in the South, in Mississippi. No, my mother was born in Birmingham, Alabama, and my father was born in Vicksburg, Mississippi.
So they had moved north for work, or?
Yes, my father was a civil engineer, and right after they got married, they moved to Ohio for working on a bridge for a project that my father was assigned to. Soon after they moved there, he was cut to part-time, and then life was a struggle for a while. But ultimately, they moved to Connecticut, where my father worked in the home office in New York City and commuted in and out for a number of years. So that's where most of my growing up years took place, in Connecticut.
Oh, okay. So what was your home like in those years that you were in Connecticut, or the years that you remember from before school?
I had two older siblings who were quite a bit older. My sister was 12 years older, and my brother was 8 years older. And then I had a younger brother who was 3 years younger. So my home life was sort of two sets of children, because my older brother and sister were not around that much. You know, they were busy in high school and then going off to college and all. So my memories of really knowing them were more when I was an adult. And my younger brother and I, was like we were a family of two children. So we lived in a house in a suburb in Fairfield County, Connecticut, and it was a wonderful neighborhood, lots of children, and so lots of activities and get-togethers and that kind of thing, the adults and the families and the children.
What kind of house was it?
It was a wooden two-story house. Let's see, I'm not sure what other kind of information you might want there. It had a nice yard. My father built a tree house in the back corner of the house. My parents were great do-it-yourselfers. One memory of my father was being up on a ladder, painting a lot, or being under things, fixing them a lot. As an engineer, he thought he could do everything, and he seemed like he could. My mother loved to garden and putter, as she would put it, in the yard. So it was a nicely landscaped yard as a result. Separate garage, a separate wooden building, up a long driveway, not connected the way we have now.
Did you have a relationship with your grandparents?
I never met any of my grandfathers. They had all died before I was born, being one of the younger children in the family. And I met both my grandmothers. My father's mother was very elderly and was in a nursing home, and I really remember only one visit with her. She was quite a character. Um, she had been a nurse, one of the first women to uh, go to nursing school, and she was a fierce personality. And my mother's mother, we visited several times in Starkville, Mississippi, which is where Mississippi State is located. And my memory of her was a very loving, sweet woman who, just always loved to have us around. And she came to visit us in Connecticut at least a couple of times, one time for my wedding. And, but my father's mother was never able to do that because her health was too infirm for that.
What were your grandparents' names?
My father's mother was Ada. I can't remember right now what her maiden name was. She had come over from England as a child when she was about 9. And there's not a lot that we know about her family history, but her husband, my father's father, was Mace Hudson Bell first. My father was Mace Hudson Bell second, and my older brother is Mace Hudson Bell the third. So, and my nephew is Mace Hudson Bell the fourth, actually, formally. So it's quite a family name. My mother's mother was Jenny May Eckford Carpenter. She had been married one time, and then her husband died. He had been a medical doctor and died. And she remarried. She remarried a man named William Carpenter, who was an entrepreneur. And so my mother spent a lot of her childhood years going back and forth between Bay City, Michigan, and Starkville, Mississippi, because he owned and operated a number of movie theaters in Bay City, Michigan area. So she would talk about taking the train up, and they would stop at the Natural History Museum in Chicago in between on their journey north or south. So those were fond memories for her.
Interesting. So what early memories do you have of your events, of your preschool years, or maybe kindergarten?
I did go to a preschool in Connecticut. The town was Darien, Connecticut. And I remember the preschool being up on a hill, and not a whole lot more than that. I mean, I think it was a happy memory. My first memory of kindergarten was on my birthday, which was in May, so it was almost at the end of the year. And I was taking cupcakes, and this is not necessarily a good memory, so that's probably why I have it. I was taking a box of cupcakes into school to share with my classmates for my birthday, and my younger brother had recently been born, and so my mother was feeling pretty frazzled, and so she drove me up late to school after everybody was in the classroom and just dropped me off and left because my younger brother, the baby, needing attention. And I walked up to the playground door where we would always go into school, and I couldn't get the door open carrying my box of cupcakes. So I had to put that down, but just as I was going to do that, a dog came up behind me, and I was, quite nervous about that because I thought if I put the cupcakes down, the dog would get them, and so I was in a quandary, and finally I just gave up trying and started walking home. And our house was over a mile away, which meant that we were in bus distance. So I usually took a bus back and forth, but because of the chaotic life at home that morning, I missed the bus. And so I was walking along the US 1, the Boston Post Road. Somehow I got across the street. I don't even remember. I mean, there was a light, so I must have done that. And all of a sudden, a car pulled up next to me, and it was the principal of the school and the custodian, who pulled over and promptly had me get in the car, which back then I did. And they drove me home to my mother's great mortification and regret. So anyway, it all worked out. I got back with my cupcakes and finished the day. But that's really my first memory of public school.
Gracious. Oh dear, awful for a child, but it makes a good story as an adult, doesn't it? Oh dear. Well, then grade school and high school, and what stands out in those years?
Well, all of that was in Darien. We lived there because my father was in the home office, so he wasn't transferred again, which he had been a number of times during my older brother and sister's years. But my younger brother and I grew up in Darien. I was very active in Girl Scouts, started as a brownie. My mother was a leader of the troop for years, and I went all the way through high school in Girl Scouts, all the different levels, and ultimately attended the last Senior Girl Scout Roundup, which was held in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Was something that was held, I think, every 4 years, and you had to try out for it. And so I had been preparing for that for a year. I was a junior in high school at the time, and we wound up with an international patrol. And so we had 2 girls from Mexico join the rest of us who were from various parts of Connecticut. And so we prepared for that all through the year and then went in the summer. And the thing that stands out most for me about that, although it was an amazing event, but they assigned, because we were only girls, they assigned an Army unit as security for the whole. There were 10,000 girls and adults there for this roundup. So there was quite an Army presence. They came and set up all the main tents and all that were used for various events. Of course, we did our own sleeping tents and all, but they also provided the MP service security for us. But their next assignment after that was Vietnam. So I've always wondered, about the people that we met through that. Not that we interacted with them much, but they were always on the outskirts of the whole event. And Vietnam was really coming. It was a pretty big deal then, so it was a sobering reminder of that.
What year was that, Becky?
I graduated in 65. It was either 63 or 64. I was either a junior or senior. Maybe I was a senior. So I think it was, well, because I can't exactly remember, 63 or 64 in mind, yeah. But my growing up years were very happy. We were very involved in our church. My mother was a Sunday school teacher. And when my brother and I were in, junior high and high school, she co-founded a nursery school at the church with a good friend of hers. And other than that, she had been at home all through the years, and so was always able to do a lot of things like that with us, like Girl Scouts and teaching Sunday school and all, because back then women didn't always go off to work the way they do now. So I felt like I had a very special growing up childhood.
It does sound that way. It's nice to remember that. Were you in other activities in high school or?
Yeah, I took music lessons. We had a piano in the house, so I took piano lessons, and I inherited a trombone from my older sister. What I wanted to play was violin, but, finances were such that we owned a trombone, so that's what I was going to play. So I did that in junior high school and high school. Let's see, Girl Scouts, church, music, those were the main things. I played sports at school and all, but was not on extracurricular teams, that kind of thing.
Did you have a part-time job or any kind of work experience?
Babysitting. I did a lot of babysitting growing up back when we earned 50 cents an hour. And I did not start summer jobs until college. So during my growing through high school years now, I didn't have any job other than babysitting.
So at that point, did you have a career interest?
There was a time when I wanted to be an oceanographer. My parents purchased a home on Martha's Vineyard Island with an eye towards retiring there. I had gone to a Girl Scout sailing camp on Martha's Vineyard, and they came up with my younger brother to pick me up at the end of it, and my parents just fell in love with it because it reminded them a lot of their small town Mississippi years, that kind of feel of being in a small town and not suburban, a suburb of New York City, like where we were living. And so the next summer we went back and they rented a house for a week. And I know my older brother and sister-in-law and their little baby were with us. I'm pretty sure my older sister and brother-in-law were not, because they were always gallivanting around, and I don't have a memory of them being with us that week. But my parents went off one day and came back and said they bought a house, which was totally out of character for them to do something that what seemed like impulsively to us. I remember our mouths all kind of dropped open when they said that. But they had friends who had done that with an eye towards retirement and lived in it so that they could get used to the community and all. And my parents always thought that was a good idea. So then after that, vacations from school and a week or two in the summer was spent going up there. And it was definitely a fixer-upper. It was an old whaling captain's house, but it had been rented for a number of years. So it needed a lot of elbow grease and loving care to bring it back. So, yep. I've gotten away from what you asked me before.
Working vacations, right? So you were interested in oceanography because you were...
Yeah, right, because of going in and out of Woods Hole to get the ferry. And we had gone by the aquarium there and the museum there. And I thought it would be so fascinating and glamorous to go out on the ships. And that was my idea till I found out that women weren't allowed to go on the ships. I mean, this was an era when, we women did not have everything at our disposal to think we could do the way women do now. So it was definitely a period before big changes came for women. And so then after that, I did not really know. Education was the thing. It was nursing or education. And so education was the one, I think in part because of my mother's pre-nursery school. And I went in to help with that periodically. And I didn't really have any other ideas. I didn't even really know where I wanted to go to college or anything like that. And finally, applied to one that a teacher that I'd had recommended to my parents as being a good one. So it was sort of mindless moving forward, I guess, in a way, because I didn't have strong feelings about it. But, I think in part it's because I'd gotten batted down on the one idea. I'm not sure that ever would have, come to any fruition, even if I could have, but it just seemed like there was not a whole lot available at the time for women.
Was education a priority for your parents?
Yes, very definitely. It was always clear that we would all be going to college. And my mother had started college, and then she only did 2 years. But my father, as a civil engineer, had gotten a degree in engineering.
So when you went to college, you developed some sort of direction eventually,
Eventually.
I presume.
Right. I started out at Wilson College in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, at this teacher's recommendation. And it was a small woman's college, and which probably was the right thing, because I was quite shy and anxious about, going off from the family and that kind of thing, and not terribly assertive in those days. And so that was a good place. And I started out majoring in sociology and minoring in anthropology, just because they sounded really interesting. And I had always been really impressed by Margaret Mead, and sort of, kind of thought that life sounded pretty neat. Well, after into my second year, it was clear that the size and the kinds of activities that happened, because we were a women's college, got to be pretty repressive. And for example, they would cart busloads of boys in from surrounding colleges for mixers, or take busloads of us over to different colleges for mixers. And my one, I guess, real example memory is that we all ate in one dining hall, because it was such a small college. And on weekends, when somebody would bring a date into the room with them, all conversation would stop, and people would start tapping their silverware, and it just, it was kind of ridiculous. So I transferred after my sophomore year to Tufts University, which at the time it was Jackson College for Women is what I transferred to. But it was part of Tufts University outside of Boston, which was a larger co-ed school. And at that point, I was pretty sure I wanted to go into education, and I wanted early childhood education. And they had it was a world-renowned Department of Early Childhood Education. And the woman in charge of it, Pitcher, I keep blanking on her first name, but she was one of the leaders in the field in early childhood education at the time. And so I went right into that, and that's what I graduated with, was a degree in early childhood education. And, felt very good about that, and felt like I had my future set in terms of work.
Mm-hmm. So what did you envision as a future?
I envisioned ultimately getting married at some point, which was sort of the road women were on then. And I envisioned teaching and doing that. I envisioned doing that after marriage. So that all got tied up with the fact that my very first weekend at Jackson, I met David, my future husband, at a Canterbury Club welcome breakfast for new students and transfer students. And I think he was the president of the Canterbury Club, which is the Episcopal student organization at colleges and universities. Or I think it's still in operation, I'm not sure, but that's what I had joined. And so I was invited to come to a breakfast and then stay on for a service. And somebody who went to the church picked me up and took me there, because it was not on our campus. It was a couple of miles away. And so David had come back as president of the Canterbury Club, and he also served as an acolyte for the minister, helping with the service. And so he was there that day, and I thought he was pretty cute. So for somebody who had never used her, Florid or anything else, to my Southern mother's great consternation, all of a sudden it came out, and I made sure I sat near him at breakfast. At the end of that breakfast, I said something about I didn't know how to find my way back to campus, and so he offered to walk me back, and so that was the beginning of a relationship. Anyway, so that very quickly kind of got entwined with my future goals.
So how did Gainesville become your future?
David was in the Peace Corps for 2 years in the Philippines, and so he was a year ahead of me in school, and so he graduated and went off to the Philippines, and I had one more year at Tufts, and I graduated, and then I had applied for jobs in the Boston area because Boston was just a wonderful city for young people to be in, and I wanted to stay there, and I had a number of friends who were staying there. And so I got a job as a kindergarten teacher in Quincy, Massachusetts, and went into an apartment with 2 other friends, and one of whom was a teacher. So we were both struggling through the first year of teaching. And then when David came back, he went to Harvard to work on a master. Well, he went into a PhD program. It was just supposed to be a straight PhD program in a field called ethnobotany. And after a while, it just became too esoteric a field. My main example of that is a good friend of David's who he met there, who we were invited to dinner at their apartment one night, he and his wife, and it seemed like all we did was sit around talking about the Latin names of trees all night long. It was kind of deadly. But anyway, so that's a lot of ethnobotany was wonderful. It was like anthropology in the botanical world, going and finding about cultures and civilizations and foods and all through the botanical uses and finds. And his advisor there had spent a lot of years in the jungles of the rainforest finding medicinal plants that he brought back. So, but that after 2 years in the Peace Corps just wasn't quite enough for David. So then he took the master's degree and then transferred to the University of Illinois, where he entered a PhD program in agronomy there. And so that kind of shaped our future there, because I always felt pretty strongly that it was really hard to have 2 people in a relationship be so career oriented that it dominated everything else. And I didn't see how you could have a family, and we both wanted children, if both of us were so career oriented that we had no time left for our children. And this, of course, was during all the years of feminist leanings and outcries and changes and that kind of thing. So that was part of my thinking. So anyway, we were at the University of Illinois, and then after he graduated, we went to the University of Maryland and then Purdue University as he rose through academia and moved into administration. And ultimately, we came to Gainesville when he was offered a position as Associate Dean of International Programs in the College of Agriculture. And then a couple of years after that, he became the Dean for International Programs at the university level. So that's what brought us to Gainesville, to make it very roundabout long.
Well, that's how his agronomy choice introduced you ultimately to the Agricultural Women's Club when you came to the University of Florida. And how did you make your acquaintance with that group?
Well, actually, the University of Florida group was the 3rd agricultural women's group I was part of. because when we moved to the University of Maryland and he was a junior professor, they had an active group there, and the department was social enough that some of the wives invited me to come to it. And so I did, as a way to meet people in this new state and new area. And it was at a time when agricultural women's clubs were very popular for young people with young children, and they offered all kinds of activities for families. And then when we moved to Purdue University, I joined it because I knew what a great organization it was and a good entree into the university, and particularly the part where David was also involved in agriculture. And so I continued to be a part of that through that. And so when we moved to Gainesville, that was one of the first things I looked for, was an agricultural women's group, and was glad to find it and tied with the University Women's Club. And so that's why I sent out feelers as soon as I could to figure out how to get into that.
And what do you remember about those first experiences with the UF Club?
The first event I went to was the University Women's Club annual open house. And it was in late June of 2006 that we moved to Gainesville. And so that open house was early September. And so I went to that at the president's house. And the Agricultural Women's Club by that point, and I don't know historically when this became part of the University Women's Club, but was one of, I believe it's 3 different women's organizations around campus that were kind of offshoots of the University Women's Club. They were under the umbrella of the University Club, Women's Club. And so I remember they had a bunch of tables set up with interest groups for the University Women's Club, and then in a side room, agricultural women were all gathered and holding court and welcoming new members, and were very warm and welcoming of me coming in then, and Nancy Ingram, who was another long-term member. She and I started that day, that year, as new members of Ag Women. So we signed up that day.
Do you remember who some of those women might have been who were inviting you in?
Deanne Connor was the main force behind that, and a very warm, welcoming presence. Mary Martzoff, Marcita Hoffman. No, I'm picturing her now. Faye. Hey, what was Faye's last name? There were just a number of long-term members of the club, and unfortunately, I don't still have my directory. I would have looked through it to get the names of the people.
Those are familiar. I believe you're talking about Faye Summerhill.
That's it, Faye Summerhill, yes.
Uh-huh.
And they were all the officers of the club at the time, and just, clearly a very warm, jovial group of people. It made you want to be part of it.
So what did you expect as far as activities, and what did you find?
I found, my memories of this from 2006 are pretty blended in with being quickly brought in on the board because by the time I got to the University of Florida, women's groups like Ag Women, Agricultural Women's Group, were really kind of moving towards being dinosaurs in my mind. And I had seen, because this was my 3rd group I joined, I had seen changes along each one. As I said, at the University of Maryland, it was a very family-oriented group with lots of activities, with interest groups about how to be a better parent, how to handle your teenager, lots of picnics and things like that. At Purdue, it was sort of moving away from that, where it was an older group, mainly women, maybe in their mid-career years, or their husbands were in their mid-career years. At Maryland, it was spouses of professors in the club. By Purdue, it had begun to be more open to staff women at the university, and not just only spouses of professors and that kind of thing. And by the time we came to the University of Florida, it was open to even the surrounding community, to women in Gainesville. And a lot of that had to do with, I think, with the changes in interest in groups like this among women, as so many women had started to go back to work. And younger women who were working and also raising children had neither the time nor inclination to join an organization like Agricultural Women's Club. And so when I came in, it was sort of at the tail end of a viable group. And I think, these truly were Deanne and Faye and Mary and Marcita, and the other women were certainly very warm and welcoming, but I think they were beginning to feel a lot of, maybe desperation is too strong a word, but a desire to try to attract in people, because the numbers were definitely shrinking and the age of the members was definitely increasing. So when I came in, I was one of the youngest people in the club at the time. Susan Barrick also came in around the same, I think she'd been in maybe a year or so. She and Kirby had transferred to the University of Florida a year or two before us. And so they, any new blood that came on the scene was cheered. One of the first, I don't remember lots of interest groups through Agricultural Women's Club at that time. It was more social gatherings with spouses. And one of the first things that David and I went to was a dinner out at the, it's on 301. It's at the Forestry Center that later burned down, and then they had to rebuild it. And I remember being so enchanted by that beautiful setting and that beautiful building. And so that was the first time we went to it, and like holiday parties and that kind of thing.
So you said that you were quickly on the board. What did that mean as it compared to just being mean for you as instead of just as a regular member?
Well, being on the board, and actually Nancy Ingram was picked up pretty quickly too to be members of the board. It meant more opportunities to get together and know the women on a better basis, because they would have meetings periodically. I can't even remember how often they were. It's not like they were every month, but to get together. And I've always been one who liked to know the inside workings of things and know all what was going on. And so and being new to the area, that was great, because I had retired and so had certainly plenty of time to do things like that.
Did you have some particular responsibilities with the organization?
I did ultimately. I think in my mind, because I've been thinking a lot about this since I agreed to do this, and I keep getting University Women's Club activities and Agricultural Women's Club activities mixed up in my mind. So I feel like Deanne Connor was the president the entire time that I was in Agricultural Women's Club. And Faye Summerhill was very active until she got sick with cancer and ultimately died from that. And Marcita Hoffman was sort of more a board member, like I was. She was struggling with some health issues herself through those years. Mary Martzoff was the long-term treasurer. And so it's like coming in there, the officers of the board were set, and they were not going to change. Not because they were not willing to change, but because they were the only ones really willing to do it and keep carrying forth with it. As I said, it was an older group of women, and so they had done their service. They were happy to come to things, but were not interested in carrying on and as an officer. And so it was kind of a different organization that way, being on a board. It was more being somebody to, kind of provide input and support and cheerlead ideas and activities and keep things moving forward. I remember at one point in later years serving on the graduate student application committee to select the graduate students who would receive scholarships for the year. But that was only 1 year when that committee kind of faded. Before that, there was a committee who did that. So in terms of my activity, I really can't remember other than just being a board member and going to regular meetings and being kind of a sounding board. And, Deanne would send out lots of emails, mainly through Gail Trotter, who did a lot of, and Gail was also very involved then, would send out emails and that kind of thing to keep people pulled together. Deanne was wonderful about, and still is, about notifying people and keeping people informed and kind of gathered together around the idea of Agricultural Women's Club.
So it sounds like the goals of the organization were at that time and had been social, principally. You mentioned scholarships, so there was some impact on the surrounding community. Would you like to say anything about that?
Yes, really, one reason I've always liked to be part of groups like this was because their outward focus was on awarding scholarships to deserving women. And so it was largely a social group, but there was a real commitment to providing ways for, in this case, women to further their education. And with education being so important to me all through my growing up years, and then being married to somebody for whom education was equally important, I've always loved being part of organizations where awarding scholarships was a major piece of it. In the case of agricultural women, the decision had been made at some point in the past that the scholarships would be awarded to graduate students only. The feeling was that there were a lot of funds available for undergraduates, but that women in science, moving on in science, were kind of a rare breed and needed all the financial support they could get. And graduate student funding was already beginning to be more limited back in 2006, as it has continued to be more and more. And so there was a real commitment to awarding scholarships to graduate students in agriculture. And I thought that was terrific.
So that was some relationship then with student groups, and you said you were on a committee reviewing their applications and that sort of thing. So it was connected to the campus in that way.
Right, which was another certainly bonus of being part of that group, because it gave me another inroads at the campus. I never found the University of Florida as easy a campus I guess Purdue University was the easiest in terms of a spouse coming into campus and trying to be a part of the life there. I mean, just parking, for example, was ridiculous, and there's no place for people who did not have parking passes to just come and park and run in for, you know, an activity or to see their spouse or whatever. And so, you know, this was another way to become part of the campus life. And I did really appreciate the fact that the scholarships that were being awarded were for students at the University of Florida. They were not, it seems to me back then we were only giving about 4 scholarships a year. The members contributed money each year to that. That's how the funds were raised. There were not any dedicated fundraising activities per se, other than just, you know, as part of your membership, you would also attach an extra amount of money to donate to the Graduate Women's Scholarship Fund.
Did you find any conflicts or difficulties between your activities, such as the club and social activities, and your family responsibilities?
No, not at all, because by the time we moved to Gainesville, our 2 daughters were grown and on their own, married and into their own lives in different places. And so it was really important for me to be a part of this because I didn't have an entree into the community through our daughters the way I had, well, particularly at the University of Maryland, but Purdue less so because they were older by then too, although our younger daughter entered into high school in West Lafayette. So at Florida, this was a really good way for somebody whose children were adults and independent to get established in the community. So it was no problem. And at the time, those early years in particular, David was traveling internationally a lot. And so it was really good for me to have things like Agricultural Women's Club to, you know, while I was home alone, so to speak.
Yeah. Was there an expectation that you would be involved in these women's groups because your husband was an administrator?
I never felt that way at the University of Florida. No, I can't say there ever was that I sensed.
And the members, you said, were faculty wives and then extended to staff and perhaps faculty of the university, or did it ever broaden?
Of course, as more women came in. But the thing was, in agriculture, the numbers of women had always been pretty low. So that was less so than staff women coming in. And particularly in Gainesville, the organization had opened up to the community. And I did meet women through the years who'd come in, you know, from the community, more so at the University Women's Club. That was really a big part of that. But agricultural women, yeah, it was, you know, I think because of the name, it limited who would come in as a result, because, you know, more community women might come into a University Women's Club, a global name like that, than to one named Agricultural Women's Club. And so I think that was part of an issue too, as this kind of club began to lose more and more excitement among people as something they wanted to join.
You talked about a dinner event at the, I believe it was the Austin Cary Forest.
That's right.
And were there other venues where things happened?
I remember we had a gathering at Gail Trotter's house one time in later years. Deanne Connor had a gathering at her house. So some of the events were more in people's homes. I can't even remember, again, getting the two clubs mixed up, that we use the University Women's Club for agricultural women's events. I believe the 100th anniversary in 2008, that event was held, I think, at the president's house. As it turned out, I was very involved in the planning for that for months ahead, but then David and I were traveling for the actual event, so I did not go to the celebration, I know, which was kind of disappointing after all the excitement generated around that. But I don't have strong memories of various places where events were held.
Well, the 100th anniversary, the centennial celebration, you were very instrumental in planning for that. Would you tell us more about that?
It was there was always a question as to whether this was the first club on organization at the University of Florida or not. And so members, longtime members, really took a lot of pride in having such a very long history for an organization. And so as we came up upon the 100th year since the founding of the organization, which was in 2008, there was a very strong sense that it should be really celebrated in some wonderful way. And Deanne, again, leading the charge, pulled together a group of people who met for several months in various ways, thinking through how best to celebrate this, and including designing a logo for the program and having people work on a program, and coming up with the idea of a woman of influence who would be honored at the 100th anniversary. And that's when Harriet Green was awarded the first, it was meant to be the first annual Woman of Influence award. As it turned out, she was the only one who ever received that honor. And a dinner was planned, and so there was a lot of work preparing for that. And then also the annual graduate scholarships were awarded as part of that event. So it was just a very exciting time with pulling out all kinds of scrapbooks that have been lovingly and faithfully maintained through the years. Scrounging in the University Women's Club, there was a cabinet in the front foyer, a locked cabinet that was Agricultural Women's Club space for keeping records and documents and that kind of thing. So pulling everything out, looking at it, going through it, gathering pictures to have available at the event, and lots of reminiscing about, who was in the pictures and what they'd done. And it was clear there were so many activities earlier than my time in the group, with families gathering for picnics once or twice a year, and lots of social events with spouses. And, so it was fun. It was a fun time for me to learn more about the history that I had not been part of, but to see all the women's excitement, women I'd grown so fond of, being so excited about this opportunity to really celebrate a wonderful event.
Were you involved in writing the history that was pulled together at that point?
I was, that's true. I was, that's when I was an officer for for Agricultural Women's Club. And I did write a history histories had been written at 2 or 3 points. I mean, 100 years is a very long time for an organization. And so periodically, women had written the history of the organization up until that time. And so I took all the different histories and kind of coordinated them and rewrote, kind of compiled them, I guess is really the best word, not wanting to get rid of them, and the women who had put the time and effort into writing their pieces of it, but bringing it more up to date so that we had that's true. I must have been the secretary of the club then, now that I remember, because I did write a lot of minutes and I was the repository for a lot of emails and that kind of thing. So yes, that was my job through that 100th anniversary celebration, was pulling together a current up-to-date history through the first 100 years. And that was included in the program.
So what was the happening in the club after the 100th anniversary?
The hope had been that this would really kind of spur new enthusiasm in the organization. I mean, it was definitely a wonderful reason to celebrate, but I think there was a lot of hope that there would be new lifeblood, it might generate new members coming in or a resurgent interest in the organization. And apart from the women who were so caught up on the committees for so many months, which was a very wonderful period of high energy and, real excitement and memories and sharing and that kind of thing, as I already said. But after that, it didn't happen, that all of a sudden the club was flooded with lots of new members. And it was a hard time. And as somebody who came in at a later point and had seen this history, I don't know, maybe it's my anthropological background or sociological or teaching or whatever, but I felt like I could see the handwriting on the wall for the club, that it was dying because of what I said earlier, that it was just not the kind of organization that was going to attract younger women to come in and carry forth and bring in lots of new interesting ideas and carry on with it. But the Deanne and Faye, and Deanne in particular, in my mind, almost single-handedly just kept things going. She such a wonderful force of nature, and it was so enthusiastic, and just there was a lot of feeling among some of the women who were on this board and were long-term members, even some who were not on the board, that they didn't want to let the organization go. It had meant so much to so many of them for so long. And I could certainly understand that. But as a newer person with some history in other organizations and sort of a more removed viewpoint, I frankly didn't see how it could continue. And I just, finally realized that I needed to pull back because they didn't feel that way. And I was just feeling like such a curmudgeon when I would say, but I don't see how we can keep going. We don't have new people coming in and everything. And so finally, and I can't remember exactly which year, but it was a couple of years later. And from the minute I joined the club till it kind of ceased major operation in 2013, I was part of the board except for this period when I pulled back and just stepped off the board because I felt like I was being such a downer and nobody else felt the way I did, or if they did, weren't expressing it the way I was. And I just decided that this was my problem. And if so, I needed to do something about it, and it wasn't fair to drag other people down. And so I just stepped back. But then I think it was for a year or so, but, I certainly was still part of the club. I didn't leave the organization. And then at some point, I went back on the board. And that was when I was on that scholarship group and all, when the rest of the officers and the board members, I guess, came around to that same viewpoint, not because of me, but because of the reality of the organization. The numbers were not there, the members were not coming in. Those who were part of it were getting way too old and infirm to be able to be actively a part of anything. And so Deanne asked if I would come back in to be part of discussions and working out a graceful way to exit. And so I did. And I think what happened was they realized the inevitable future ending point of such a wonderful organization, and they decided that they wanted to take charge of how that was going to end, rather than having it thrust upon them in a way that might not feel so good.
And how did that proceed?
Well, there was a lot of talking about how to wind down, and the biggest concern was that we still had quite a bit of money in our scholarship fund, and how would we manage with that? So the decision was made to have one last membership call for members to join, send in their dues, and whoever rejoined for that year, their information would be included in the annual directory, and that would be the last directory. And so, and that would be the last year that membership dues were collected. And so there was a lot of care in sending out emails to explain to everyone what was going on and why. And at the same time, some of us met with Elaine Turner in IFAS to talk about what we could do with our scholarship money, and so that students could continue to benefit, and that it wouldn't all just, we didn't know what would happen with it. And Elaine was the person who told us about how IFAS awarded scholarships to students, that they had a committee of faculty from all different departments within IFAS, and they would get together and review applications, and then they would award scholarships according to some distribution of funds that was based on the amounts of money for the scholarships, and that kind of thing, and that they would be happy to review our scholarship applicants and award the scholarships, because that was something that was beginning to be harder and harder. That's why I was invited to do that one year, which was something I'd been doing for a number of years through the University Women's Club scholarship program. And so I was happy to do it, but it had always been a group of women who did it year after year for Agricultural Women's Club. And I believe that I took Faye Summerhill's place after she died on that scholarship award review committee. And then that was the last year before they took it over at the university level through IFAS to read them, because it was getting harder and harder to read through these absolutely magnificent scholarship applications, and have the time and energy for some of the members to be able to do that. And so having this committee through the university seemed very wise, because these were people who were on the job and knew the research and knew what was needed and could identify which were worthy projects as opposed to worthy pros and made us all feel good that the best people would be getting scholarships. Now, the one caveat with our being willing to do this was that the university would not approve scholarships being awarded to women only. So it had to be, we had to agree that men could also apply for these scholarships. And if this committee at the university level or the IFAS level felt they were the best candidates, that then it would go to men. And so, of course, that took time, and this organization that had long always awarded scholarships to women to agree to, and rightly so, it went out to everyone for a vote. I can't remember if we had a face-to-face meeting to do that. I feel like it was done by phone call and email and that kind of thing. But the agreement was there. The women who were still members of the organization understood the need to move it to that level. The step-by-step process that Deanne spearheaded to kind of wind things down and keep everybody in the loop about what was happening and why was magnificent. And at least I never heard about anybody who said, hey, wait a minute, we can't do it that way. You know, people were really on board with it. And so we entered into an agreement with Elaine Turner, and that's when Gail Trotter had us out to her house. I can't remember if you were there. I think you were there too, Kathy, for that lunch. And we had a lovely luncheon, and then we had a formal signing of these documents officially having the university take charge of reviewing and awarding the scholarships. The one aspect that we kept control of through all of that was that we would handle funds. And Mary Martzoff and you, Kathy, and Gail, I think, all worked together on that for several years after. But we did not want to give up control of the funds for a number of different reasons. And the university or the IFAS agreed to letting us do that, which was really nice. You know, it kept us with our hands in the administration of the scholarships, and they continued to invite members to come to the scholarship awards dinners every year. And you know, so that was a really wonderful way to do it. And I really feel that the process that this organization went through was just a model for how to wind down an organization and go out in style.
Well, you've described it wonderfully. Were you still part of things when the funds were ultimately turned over to the University of Florida Foundation to be dissolved into two ongoing scholarships in the name of the Agricultural Women's Club?
Yes, I was part of it then. Yes, and also when we ultimately had awarded 4 scholarships each year. Maybe I'm wrong on that. One was named after Deanne around that time. The members really felt that, as I said, she had almost single-handedly moved us all forward to this careful dissolution of the group, and wanted to honor all her efforts as long-term president of the organization by naming one of the scholarships after her. And then one was called the Agricultural Women's Club Scholarship. So I guess we just had 2 then at the end. For a while during my earlier years, we had 4, but then we went to the 2. And then when we did the sort of official stepping back from the organization in 2013, we had at least one, maybe two events pulling together members that were held at the village, a luncheon in a room at the village, and where we could bring them up to date on kind of what was happening with the scholarships. And it was just a wonderful way for long-term members to get back and see each other again and kind of catch up with each other. And I remember the first one, Faye Summerhill was able to come to. So it couldn't have been that she had died then. I think when I was on that graduate committee to review the applications, I think it was that she was sick at that point, because she did come to that first lunch we had at the village. And then we've had a couple more since then, not all of which I was able to go to, but.
Well, looking back to the long history, can you imagine what the founders in 1908 would have thought about this trajectory and especially the ending that you've described so well?
I think they would have had to have had a lot of conversations to be brought up to speed. I mean, I think, their vision when they started it was so wonderful. And for so many years, it just sounded like such a wonderful, vibrant, large organization of women affiliated with IFAS at the University of Florida. And it was such a special part of their being here, and I mean in Gainesville, sorry, which I'm not in anymore, but that it probably would have been maybe beyond their understanding at that time to foresee a time when this kind of an organization for women would almost become a thing of the past, that things would change so drastically, because when they formed it, women were mainly at home and raising their families. And, so this was a wonderful needed outlet and a wonderful way to socialize with colleagues of their husbands and getting the children together and all. But I think it probably would have been very difficult for them to look forward to see a time when it might have to disband for the reasons it has. And yet I think if they had had a chance to kind of work through the history of it, they probably would have understood. And I would like to think that they would have appreciated the classy way in which I feel that we went out. I mean, I was so impressed after feeling really discouraged and about it, to the point where I did pull back for a while because I felt like I was just being so negative, that they really grabbed hold and it, as I said, it had nothing to do with me, I hope, because I did not want to be a negative influence. But that's the way to do it, to go out in style and on top of things and in the way you want it to. So.
Well, you've described it really wonderfully, and Becky. Is there anything else you would like to add on the Agricultural Women's Club before I ask you a final question?
I think that was pretty well everything. For me, it was an absolutely wonderful entree into the University of Florida and the College of Agriculture in particular. I met some friends who were friends for all my years in Gainesville, and a very, very special group of very warm-hearted women. And I have no regrets about being a part of it. I'm just so thrilled I had an opportunity to be just a small part of the long history of the club, which truly was and is a wonderful testament to all of the women through the years who were committed to maintaining the Agricultural Women's Club.
Thank you very much. That's been absolutely magnificent information and so articulately presented, and great contribution to this oral history. My question is, in this unusual time of a pandemic, you and your husband were making a move. And my first question is, how is the pandemic in general affecting you? But more particularly, that's going to quickly dissolve into the circumstances under which you have had to do this to make a big change.
Right now in North Carolina, where we are, the numbers have been rising, as almost everywhere. The governor here was one of the earlier governors to instill quarantine procedures, but by the time we actually moved, the 2-week quarantine had been dropped when you moved in. Lots of safe at home and that kind of thing. But then this governor was also one who began to open up into phase 1. I think there are 3 phases, and phase 1 and 2 had gone in when the numbers in the state started climbing again. People in New Hanover County, which is in southeastern North Carolina along the coast where we're living now, it seems to me felt pretty safe because it's a bit of an isolated community. For example, it takes almost 2 hours when you leave I-95 to get here. And so I think they felt safe that we were not a part of a big city like Charlotte and Raleigh-Durham and all, where the numbers grew pretty drastically, pretty quickly. And so I guess we've seen a lot of mask wearing, and we've seen a lot of not mask wearing. Our new neighborhood here has been warm and welcoming when we've all been outside to see them, but they've had to disband with an every other month social gathering within this neighborhood, of course, because they were held in homes and kind of potluck dinners, we understand. And so, apart from everybody's greeting us so warmly, there's no way for us to move forward right now and getting to know them any better, other than waving from the front porch. I think it's going to be interesting to see in 2 weeks after the 4th of July, because this being a beach community, there were scads of people coming in for the weekend, and here over the 4th. We did go down to the beach with our younger daughter and her family, who are the reason that we moved to this community. They were startled by the numbers of people who were on the beach. We didn't go down until the evening, trying to avoid crowds. And the fireworks that were going off that evening, they said they'd never seen so many. I mean, it was it was magnificent. You couldn't even figure out which way to turn. They were just constantly being shot up. We did feel we were able to stay at a safe distance from everyone. It was not the pictures of the wall-to-wall people we've seen, like from Florida. But, but David and I have talked about it and feel that was probably, I don't know, we'll find out if we made a mistake, I guess, in 2 weeks, but 2 or 3 weeks. But it was a little anxiety causing for us being around quite so many people. But we all felt that the reason there were so many fireworks and so many people was because people couldn't go anywhere else for a celebration. They're not going to restaurants, not bars, because those have all been reclosed. And, that people wanted to be out and celebrate. So I don't know, it'll be interesting to see what happens with this after this. We're just totally in a quandary as to what to do about visiting our other daughter and her family who are in South Central Ohio. And, our plan had been that we would move here, and then we would make plans and spend a lot of time there with them, because our older two grandsons who live there in Ohio will be entering 9th and 12th grade. And so they have big activities ahead of them this year, including marching band that we'd like to be able to go see. And so as with so many people, we're just all over the place. Our numbers are not growing the way they are in states like Florida and Texas and Arizona and all. So I think we feel a little bit freer to come and go, like to the grocery store and Lowe's for all our setting up projects, but still we wear masks everywhere we go, and feel frustrated when we see people without masks. And we do a lot of talking with our daughter about whether we can get together with them, because she and her husband work, but they both wear masks for their work, and our daughter wears a face shield, and she's double masking and has her temperature taken every day. So it's feeling our way, just like everyone is, and scared to death about what's going to happen for our 4 grandsons who are all in public school, and how they're going to go back, and whether we're going to need to step up to help with our 8 and 10-year-old grandsons here in Wilmington. If they can't go back to school, they're going to need some more input. So anyway, it's a horrible time. It really is. A lot of fears and anxieties. My husband and I both wonder if we might have had it already, because we went, as it turns out, went on a cruise to the Caribbean in late January, before anything came up about this. And then about 10 days after we got back, I developed some kind of a bronchial infection that actually left me breathless, having a difficult time breathing, although I never had a fever. And when I went to urgent care about it, the doctor said he didn't know what it was, and gave me some medicine, and finally called it some kind of a bronchitis. And it didn't get worse than that. I mean, the breathlessness was enough that I did feel scared, because I'd never had anything like that before. And then David got a milder version of it after I did. But we've never been tested to see, or had the antibody testing, because you can't yet, if you don't have other symptoms. So, and we're not sure anyway, from all the news about, well, you can get it again or whatever, whether it would, at this point, whether it would do any good other than to let us know that maybe we'd already had it. So it's just a really difficult time for that. It's hard for us to be able to figure out, now that we're just about done settling in, how to put our roots down in this new community. I mean, we're not going to go out to any church. It's hard to look at service videos at churches here when we don't know anyone or anything about the church. We don't know how we're going to, there's volunteer activities we thought about that we could join as our entree here, and we're not going to do that. So David is going to tune into the retired faculty at the University of Florida meetings on Zoom. So it's kind of clinging to our past may be the best way for us to move forward for the future.
Well, that is definitely a particular kind of issue that you're dealing with in the midst of a historic time for everybody trying to figure out how to manage. So thank you again, Becky, for spending this time. It's really been a wonderful contribution that you're making. So at this point, I will stop the recording and end the interview.
Thank you.